Welcome to the Mick Dark Horror Series. Lights out. Good. Here we go.
My eyes burst open, flooding my vision with sunlight. I'm usually not a morning person, but the excitement accompanying our planned trip had me bursting to jump out of bed, ready to get going, as soon as the sun crept into our bedroom.
Babe, wake up! Let's get a jump on traffic now and get going,
I said as I nudged my sleeping fiancée, Demi, awake. She grunted her disapproval and muttered something about having set an alarm, but I was determined to get going so we could be at the airport waiting for our scheduled flight without the worry of running late and potentially missing our flight. I sat up in the bed, pulling the covers off my sleeping bride-to-be. Annoyed, she rolled over and dragged herself to the edge of the bed, casting a death glare at me over her shoulder. I smiled at her and marveled at her beauty. Corny, I know, but it's true. The sun cast a glow around her, and I was completely mesmerized. Nearly a decade together, and the feeling of awe and amazement was as present as it was when we had first started dating. I looked at her, and the feeling of love and adoration washed over me. She left the bed and made her way to the bathroom, and I sat gazing into space, absent-minded.
You rushed me out of bed? Now you're sitting and daydreaming?
She laughed. I snapped out of my daze and laughed with her.
I guess you're right,
I acknowledged. Her dark hair glistened in the sun, made all the darker by her pale skin. It was a particularly beautiful combination of dark hair and light skin, not the goth emo kind of look you see depicted in movies. Her soul-catching eyes made that much more captivating as they twinkled in the golden rays looking down on us. I followed her into the bathroom to brush my teeth and get the day started. I could feel Demi's excitement growing as we stood side by side, the cool smell of mint from the toothpaste engulfing us. She didn't say anything, but I could see her infectious smile building up as she brushed. Neither of us had ever been to any part of North America, and we jumped at the opportunity to take the trip. Our good friend Joseph had sent out the wedding invites months back. We decided to take the trip to celebrate his beautiful union, while at the same time making the most of the trip and going a couple of weeks before the wedding date to see all that we could see. When we told Joseph we would be there for a few weeks before the wedding to have a bit of vacation, he immediately offered us a room at his place. I'm not sure who was most excited out of all of us, but here we were, bags packed, getting ready to take a trip across the ocean. It was an exciting prospect, giving us a chance to see another country. Demi and I had taken a few trips around Europe while we got our respective degrees, but the allure of America had always bit at Demi, and now we had the opportunity to go and tick another country off the list. We spat out the toothpaste in tandem and rinsed our mouths clean. I walked back to the bedroom while Demi began her morning routine of applying dozens of skincare products to her face. Maybe she's a vampire, I thought to myself with a chuckle. And that's why she's so pale and always needs to put so many products on her face. It's to protect her from the sun. My overactive imagination continued.
What are you laughing at now?
Demi shot back at me from the bathroom.
Not much, just thinking to myself,
I replied to her.
Thinking, huh? Well, that's a first.
She retorted with a laugh. I laughed quietly at her witty reply while I opened my wardrobe and selected the best option I could think of for traveling. Gray sweatpants, a black shirt, and a gray sweatshirt. Somewhat stylish and extremely comfortable. In my opinion, it is extremely important to be comfortable on long trips. I've never understood how people can wear suits and other such formal wear when they travel long distance, but different strokes for different folks. Demi soon joined me in the bedroom, donning the same travel wear as me. We always made it a habit to dress the same when we traveled. It was just a fun little thing we did. Matching outfits on, we were ready to set off to the airport. I began loading the car with our suitcases and travel bags, while Demi ensured our documents were in order so we could get through the airport easier. Boarding passes downloaded on our phones, passports secured, cash for emergencies tucked away safely in a hidden compartment within the bag. Once the final checks for anything left behind had been completed, we triple-checked the door was locked and bundled into the car. The plush leather was cold, as you would expect in winter, and the steering wheel seemed to bite my hand as I gripped to navigate the road. Almost as if reading my mind, Demi pressed the button for the heated seats to activate, and I soon found myself suitably warm and quite cozy. I'm surprised I didn't doze off. I felt like I had snuggled back into bed. It was about a 35-minute car ride to the airport, of which we spent most of that time belting out Black Bear songs at the top of our voices. We're not the best singers, but in the privacy of our own vehicle, fun trumps ability when it comes to entertainment. It wasn't long until we arrived at the airport, made our way to the long-stay parking lot. We found our parking and slotted our car neatly into endless rows of cars, waiting for their owners to return. Bags in tow, holding hands and full of smiles, we entered the airport more than ready for our trip and adventure. The airport itself was a hub of activity. People swarmed from every direction, some running so not to miss their flights. That wouldn't be us. We were here well ahead of time. We took a leisurely walk to the area that housed the restaurants and other eateries, deciding to have a nice sit-down meal before our flight. The boarding gate had not yet opened, and so to kill time, there would be nothing better to do than get something to eat. Settling into a Weatherspoons, I couldn't help but feel a yearning for McDonald's. For some reason, if I see a McDonald's, I want it. Looking at the menu and seeing barbecue ribs quickly snapped me out of my McDonald's fixation, and I eagerly waited to give my order.
Isn't 7 a.m. rather early for ribs?
Demi asked me. She had ordered Eggs Benedict, as she often did when we went out for breakfast. Her surprise at the ribs turned to shock when I ordered a pint of beer to accompany the ribs.
What?
I asked her with a smile.
Hey, we're on holiday now. Time to let loose a little.
We sat at our table and looked around at all the travelers. Demi and I always play this game where we imagine where people are going and why. We sat talking about people and laughing, even when our food arrived. The ribs looked sublime. They were falling off the bone and absolutely drenched in sauce, while Demi's plate looked more in line with something you would see on a cooking TV show. I could tell she regretted her decision somewhat, and as any loving fiancé would, I gave her one of my ribs to try.
You always order food that tastes better than mine,
she complained jokingly.
I think I should just let you order for me from now on,
she continued. I laughed and agreed while wiping a bit of barbecue sauce off her chin, a sure sign she was enjoying our meal. We ate slowly, enjoying each other's company and talking about what we were going to do once we arrived. Before we knew it, the intercom was sounding and alerting us that the boarding gates were now open. Finishing off the last of my beer, we settled the bill, grabbed our bags, and made our way to check-in. The gate was crowded as was to be expected, but with a rack of ribs and beer in my belly, I wasn't too fussed with the slow-moving line. We slowly made our way to the front of the line, scanned our passports, and walked into the airplane. We found our seats, scanned our passports, and walked on to the airplane. We found our seats, stowed our overhead bags, and settled in. Demi unpacked her iPad and headphones as she prepped for the 4,000-mile journey. As for me, one of the greatest attributes is being able to sleep almost on command. So my plan for the flight was to kick back, sleep, and wake up when we got to Michigan. The airplane wasn't anything spectacular, your usual 3-row seats on either side with a row down the middle, a small screen to watch whichever movies they decided were best for entertainment. Demi could never sleep on flights, so she would download as many movies and episodes of series as she could so that she wouldn't be bored while I slept. Often we would watch together, but odds are I would fall asleep before we even watched one movie. No sooner had we taken off than I felt my eyes getting heavy with sleep. I welcomed the darkness with open arms. Sleeping is amazing. It's like a time machine to the future when you're traveling. You sleep and all of a sudden you're at your destination. I was jolted awake after what felt like a few minutes of shut-eye. I stared around in shock, confused as to what was happening. Demi laughed as she told me the pilot had said they were descending and to prepare for slight turbulence as we dropped towards the ground. My pounding heart slowed down slightly as I looked at the completely calm passengers around me. The fear turned to excitement as the realization that we were nearly touching down came to me. We were about to land. Demi gripped my hand as we approached the ground. I couldn't tell if she was somewhat nervous or the excitement had gotten to her too. Once we landed, the plane disembarked relatively quickly and we were once again in a line to get our passports stamped. That too didn't take long. And we hastily made our way through duty-free towards arrivals. Once we got through, the figure of Joseph was waiting for us with the biggest smile on his face. It had been years since we last seen him, and the joy was contagious. I immediately burst into a Cheshire grin and quickened my pace to meet the smiling man. I had met Joseph in preschool, and throughout our years in education, we were in the same school right up to the end. We parted ways to go to university as we envisioned different paths in life regarding career choices. Even living thousands of miles away from each other for so long, we chatted frequently and checked in with each other. It was a friendship that had stood the test of time. With my quickened pace, Joseph was very soon right in front of me. We didn't even say anything, we simply laughed and embraced. Demi approached us and we disengaged the embrace so Joseph could greet her. He took a step back and looked at us with a gleam in his eye.
Oh man, I can't believe you guys are really here!
He exclaimed to us.
I had hoped you would come for the wedding, but coming this far before is a real treat. It's been so long since I've seen you guys. We wouldn't have missed your wedding for the world.
I told Joseph with a smile.
Hey, and what could be better than coming and spending a bit of time seeing where you've decided to set up shop?
I asked him.
Let's get going. I can't wait for you guys to meet Elizabeth.
Joseph's hulking figure lurched towards us and retrieved Demi's bag.
You're a big man, Alex. You can carry your own bag,
he said with a laugh. His dark hair and dark skin turned in a flash, and in the blink of an eye he was a good distance ahead of us. I'm by no means a small person. I stand at a humble height of around 5'8", but what I lack in height I make up for in stature. Having weight trained religiously for most of my life, I have a pretty decent amount of muscle on me. With age, I've turned the intensity down a little and become a little softer in certain areas. Joseph, in comparison, was over 6 feet. He never explicitly said outright how tall he is, but pretty tall is the answer. He was never one for the gym, and his tall frame had always been filled out by a pretty solid physique, brought about by sports and eating takeaways. If I had to describe him in one word, it would be burly. We were soon out of the airport and heading towards a pretty big truck. Right off the bat, the stereotypical image on American Living popped in my head. A burly man in a flannel shirt driving a huge truck. Once again, I found myself chuckling to myself.
You really enjoy talking to yourself, huh?
Demi said, smiling.
The best company you can keep is yourself,
I replied with a smirk. Once we were at Joseph's truck, he gently lifted the bags into the back and closed the cover over there.
Jump in, guys. We've got a little bit of a drive ahead of us.
He warned.
Living deep in the woods, are you?
Demi asked playfully. I didn't expect the stone-cold reply of,
Yeah, kind of. But I like peace and quiet.
As we drove through the bustle of the town, I couldn't help but wonder about where we were going. I'm not the biggest fan of city life, and so I was quite excited that we would be staying away from the bright lights. We took the time we had during the drive, about an hour or so, according to Joseph, to find out more about Elizabeth. Demi and I obviously had chatted to her on Skype and FaceTime when we called Joseph, but we wanted to know the small things about her so we could really get to know the woman who was marrying my oldest friend. The conversation flowed, and I barely noticed the transition from the city lights to the trees covering us from both sides.
Nearly home,
Joseph said excitedly. Less than 100 meters later, we turned off the main road onto a dirt road. I thought he would have lived kind of in the woods, but I definitely wasn't expecting a literal cabin in the woods. As we drove down the dirt path, we approached his house. It was a very humble, old-style farmhouse kind of house. There were absolutely no neighbors around. That shocked me almost as much as how much woodland surrounded us.
Yo, why haven't you got any neighbors?
I asked Joseph.
You're used to living like sardines, are you?
Joseph replied jokingly. This made Demi and I both burst out laughing. Residing in England, most houses are semi-detached, so it's almost like one house splits right down the middle, and then shared as two houses. So I guess he had a point.
We don't live like that out here. Here you have as much space as your garden. It's incredible. All this forest is virtually untouched. Our nearest neighbor is miles away.
And Joseph, being Joseph, had to finish the statement with a creep line from a horror movie.
Out here, no one will hear you scream.
We pulled up into his driveway into the side of the house. Elizabeth was standing at the door waiting for us, the lights in the house shining brighter than the stars above us.
Home sweet home,
Joseph told us as he threw the gear knob into park. With the visible excitement of a child at Christmas time, he jumped out of the car and ran the few steps to his future wife.
Babe, they're here! Look!
He shouted with glee. He quickly returned to the truck and hauled the bags towards the house, encouraging us to get inside and settle in.
It's so nice to finally meet you,
Elizabeth said with just as much excitement as Joseph. They had the same energy. They were a perfect match.
We've talked so much, but meeting in person is just the best.
She continued.
I couldn't agree more.
I replied to her with a friendly smile. We exchanged pleasantries and gave her a tentative hug after traveling for so long.
You guys must be exhausted. The food is on the stove. Why not freshen up before dinner and you can relax?
She asked us.
That sounds absolutely delightful,
Demi said with a smile. We walked through the living room, guided by Joseph. The living room was pretty eerie with the heads of more than a few animals decorating the walls.
Become quite the hunter, I see,
I inquired.
Yes, sir. Nothing like going in the woods and bagging a prize. I'll take you guys if you're up for it. I know you guys love the outdoors. That would be great. We'd love to.
Demi and I said in unison.
I mean, if you guys are up for it, Elizabeth's brother had actually pitched a tent not far from here. If you guys are feeling jet lagged and you don't want to sleep yet, we could take a walk and sit by the fire. Walking in the quiet of night is a beautiful experience,
Joseph continued. Having slept the whole flight, I didn't feel at all tired, so the offer actually sounded pretty good to me. I figured a walk would make me feel a little tired, and the fresh air would definitely relax me.
I'm keen,
I replied in a heartbeat.
I'm a bit tired. But if it isn't too far, I'd be happy to come with too,
Demi said.
Great, let's eat and get going. No point showering now, you'll want to shower when you get back, rather,
Joseph told us. I didn't realize just how hungry I was. I had 2 full plate servings of the beef stew and potatoes. It was very tasty and an extremely different flavor from the usual cooking in England. We washed the stew down with a locally brewed beer that Joseph said paired extremely well with the meat. I have to agree with him, as a beer tasted fantastic when we guzzled it by the pint while we ate. With the plates barely cleared, Joseph asked Elizabeth if she was coming. His question was met with a groan and complaints about not wanting to get dirty. After a bit of coaxing, Elizabeth finally gave in. Ever since we were kids, Joseph had an incredible knack for badgering people into saying yes. Even after they had repeatedly said no to something, Joseph retrieved flashlights from a storage cupboard and handed one to each of us.
It gets pretty dark out,
he advised.
There isn't much light pollution, so the only light is the good old moon.
We set out with Joseph leading the pack. The path wasn't quite wide enough for us to walk side by side, so we walked in a single line formation. I brought up the rear, with my reason being I could protect my woman if we were attacked by a bear or something if I was behind her, seeing as Joseph and Elizabeth were ahead of us. The trees surrounding us seemed to almost suck the light directly from our flashlights. Every time I would shine my light towards the trees, the light seemed to almost disappear just as soon as I lifted the beam. I opted to keep my light trained on the ground ahead of me. Joseph called back some facts about Michigan and the surrounding woods every so often. I couldn't quite hear him, but I appreciated the sentiment. We walked around for 20 minutes when I could see a flickering light not too far ahead of us. The light startled me. Usually in the woods you can hear branches snapping and crickets and other nocturnal animals going about their lives. It was eerie, this silence, almost as if the animals had opted not to come out and stayed in their burrows and trees. As we approached the light given off by a fairly large campfire, we saw the figure huddled over with their back turned to us. We were but a few feet from it, and they didn't seem to have heard us.
Hey, Daniel!
Joseph hollered, shattering the silence. The figure turned around slowly, revealing a stone-faced gentleman, roughly about our age if I had to guess.
Why do you need to shout? I was enjoying the silence.
The figure answered in an annoyed tone.
Hey, sorry about that, bud. I'm just super excited. Alex is here.
Joseph said with jubilance.
That's nice and all, but there's really no need to be so loud.
Daniel said as he stood up. He shook mine and Demi's hand very firmly and softly said something about having heard all about us.
We thought we'd come out here for a bit and sit by the fire. Show Alex and Demi the beauty of the woods at night.
Joseph explained.
Okay, have a seat.
Daniel said, gesturing towards wooden stools positioned around the inferno. We all sat side by side. No one spoke for a while. We just gazed into the fire, almost as if hypnotized. It was, of course, Joseph that broke the silence. All he did was comment on how beautiful the night sky was, and how you don't get to see the stars like this in the city. This seemed to set Daniel off, and he stood up and glared at Joseph.
Why do you find it so hard to sit quietly? Are you a fucking child?
He hissed at Joseph. It was quite strange. Daniel couldn't have been much taller than me, with considerably less muscle or fat on him. Joseph would completely tower over him if he stood up. As Daniel stood up, his blonde hair bounced. His blue-looking eyes seemed to flicker with a deep sense of rage. Joseph, however, didn't even flinch. He didn't even look at Daniel. All he said was,
Relax, dude. We're just here to enjoy the fire. Don't be so rude in front of our guests, please.
This seemed to infuriate Daniel more than a mouthful of verbal abuse, and he turned to walk away before we could open our mouths to say anything. What surprised me was that he was walking towards the thicket of trees, not towards the path from which we came. His tent was in the clearing near the fire, and I didn't see him carry a flashlight.
Yo, what was that about?
I asked the nonchalant couple sitting with us.
Daniel is interesting.
Elizabeth replied.
Interesting isn't quite the word I'd use. He's more of a runt with a C.
Joseph corrected her.
He practically lives in the forest, feels like it's super important to be respectful and honor the wild.
Joseph continued.
He doesn't like to be disturbed when he's out here doing his thing.
Joseph added.
I didn't see him carry a flashlight or anything.
Demi asked, almost as if she read my mind. Joseph shrugged and replied.
I don't know. He probably knows the terrain from memory, uses the stars to navigate or something. Who knows?
I barely knew Daniel, but concern for his safety washed over me, especially as Joseph and Elizabeth didn't seem fazed at all.
Are there any animals out there that could hurt him?
I asked.
We got black bears, but they aren't known for being aggressive. They're usually pretty shy and they'll only really attack if they feel threatened.
Joseph reassured me.
Okay, so are we just gonna chill here, or...?
Demi asked uncomfortably.
No need for us to get in a huff about Daniel. He'll calm down and come back. Enjoy the wilderness and the fresh air.
Elizabeth said with a seemingly forced smile. Once again I got lost in the flames, as if my very soul was absorbed by the fire, and I couldn't look away. It was almost meditative. I felt extremely relaxed, but also mindful of my surroundings. A thought crossed my mind about how incredible it felt, and for a moment, I could almost relate to Daniel in that I didn't want anything to disturb me while I was entranced by the dancing flames. As my consciousness seemingly drifted into and became one with the forest itself, I once again came to realize there were no sounds around us, just as I was about to ask if anyone else noticed it. I knew without a doubt. We all heard it. The scream seemed to pierce my very soul. From the extreme relaxation of the fire, I felt a fear I never had before. The scream sounded like it came from a soul being tortured in the very depths of hell. In my 27 years on this earth, I'd never heard a more gut-wrenching scream. I looked around me and everyone was frozen in fear. No one moved. I shifted to look around, but not a muscle was moved. I could see Demi trembling, and I instinctively reached out to comfort her. She recoiled at my touch and shrieked in fear. Her scream was nowhere near what we had just heard. Joseph and Elizabeth didn't even flinch at Demi's shriek.
Was that Daniel?
I asked.
No, it wasn't. It couldn't have been.
Joseph stammered. Having been broken out of the frozen fear trance, Joseph stumbled and tripped, rushing to get to the tent. I was riddled with confusion, thinking he was hoping to seek refuge in the flimsy tent. It was only when his top half emerged after rustling around in the tent that I saw the rifle he gripped with white knuckles. A branch snapped behind him, and he turned with a speed I'd never seen and aimed the rifle into the dark. He backed slowly towards us. We huddled in a circle of sorts with our backs towards each other, trying to peer into the dark.
Should we go and look for Daniel?
Demi asked fearfully.
Did you hear that scream? It didn't sound like any sound a man could make. I've watched enough horror movies to know not to be a hero. We can run back to the house, call the police. Once we're safe in the house, we can plan better.
Joseph suggested. Elizabeth hadn't said a word. She was as white as a ghost with eyes that looked as if they would burst from her head. She just whimpered and whispered Daniel's name.
Let's go! We can't stand around here waiting for whatever that was.
I said. Equipped with our flashlights and Joseph leading the way with the rifle, we moved swiftly back to the trail that would lead us home. The trees that seemed somewhat entertaining on the way here were now taunting us, hiding something that could potentially harm us. Wolves, maybe. And if it was a wolf, surely there would be more than one. I thought I heard something behind me, so I turned to look. The lapse in concentration was enough to distract me to the fact that the line in front of me had stopped, and so I ran into the huddled group.
Why the hell did you all stop?
I screamed at them. No one answered me. As I collected myself and picked up my dropped flashlight,